Hi students, how are you? This is the second video about biological kingdoms. The first one was viruses. If you haven't seen it, well, the suggestion is to see it. It's going to be helpful previous to the exam. And today we're going to talk about bacteria and archeans. Well, as you can remember, in biology we can classify the organisms in three different domains according to the type of cell. Eukaryotic domains belong to the cells that has a nucleus. Bacteria domain and archaea domain belongs to an organisms that we called as prokaryotic organisms, which means they don't have a nucleus. Despite of the look of this picture, the picture of archeans, what we are seeing here is just a big vacuole. It's a vacuole. Remember, the vacuole stores food or stores water, and it is not an actual nucleus. For being a nucleus, it must have DNA, like the one we can have in eukaryotic domain. So we are going to focus our study today in these two groups, bacteria and archaea, which they don't have a nucleus. They don't have a nucleus inside, like eukaryotic domain does. Well, getting into business. This is the general structure of a bacteria cell. What we are seeing here is the common structure of it. Probably some of them can be motile, which means they can move, by a flagellum or flagella in plural. Also, they are going to have these thick layers of, layers of membrane, it could be, or layers of walls that are going to be as a protection of the cell. Generally, the most external part of the bacteria can be known as a capsule, but remember, it is also similar to a wall cell, like the ones that plant cells have. Another structure important for bacteria is the DNA, or the genetic material they contain. It is circular. It's not linear as the one that we have, us, for example, or eukaryotic cells have. This is not linear, it's circular DNA. Also, they're going to have their cytoplasm, and the only component that they will have as a organelle are the ribosomes. Ribosomes, remember, they are useful for creating proteins. Okay? The little blue dots that we have in the picture are going to be the ribosomes. Also, they have these tiny particles of DNA that are called as plasmids. Plasmids are small particles of DNA that the bacteria can use to infect other cells. So, as a review, they have a flagellum, they have circular DNA, they have a capsule that is also a wall, they have only ribosomes, and they have plasmids, small particles of DNA. So if we start talking about the metabolism of a bacteria cell, not the structure, the metabolism, we can say that these organisms are autotroph, which means they produce their own food, or they could be heterotroph if they feed on others. Remember that some bacteria can be also decomposers, like the one that destroys dead material or returns the nutrients to the soil. Also, we can classify bacteria as the way they can use or they can't use oxygen. They could be known as aerobic organisms, which means they use oxygen, or they could be anaerobic organisms if they don't need oxygen to produce ATP. Remember that. So, because of they are unicellular organisms, only one cell, we can consider that they have metabolism. Remember, viruses, they don't have cells, so they do not have metabolism. In bacteria, they are formed by cells, only one cell, unicellular organisms, and we can say that they have different types of metabolism. Autotroph, if they produce their food; heterotroph, if they feed on others; aerobic, if they use ATP if they use oxygen to produce ADP, and anaerobic organisms if they don't need oxygen to produce ADP. Okay, now going into the shapes of bacteria, there are a lot of different shapes of them, but they can be grouped in three general categories: cocci, bacilli, and others. Look how the general shape changes. Cocci, they are generally like rounded cells. Bacilli, they are like this kind of oval shape. And we have others that can be like this little guy over here that is just all twisted. Remember, they are just one cell. They are unicellular organisms. Now, generally, when we think about a bacteria, we can imagine that they are organisms that harm our body. And well, that's not actually true. Not all the bacteria are bad for our health or the health of other organisms, but some of them they can produce very nasty or very uncomfortable diseases. For example, we can have bacteria that can affect the brain and causes meningitis. It means a swelling of the brain. Other, well, like the one that we have when we get a cold and the cold isn't treated accurately, can affect the ear. Some others can affect the nose or probably the eyes. It is more common for us when we have a stomach flu to have a bacteria inside it. Also, gastritis can be chronic gastritis can be produced by a bacteria living inside our stomach. Skin infections, sexual transmitted infections, lung infections, urinary infections, well, some other infections probably in the skin and other organs can be caused by a bacteria. But remember, not all bacteria are bad. Remember, some of them are useful, very useful, and even they are necessary if we want a plant to grow. Remember, plants need a element that is stuck in the ground, in the soil, that is the nitrogen. If there's no bacteria in the soil, the plants could never intake the nitrogen from the soil in order to produce leaves, fruits, or any other structure inside it. So they're actually good bacteria that we need in order to have good food chains. Bacteria. Good bacteria. Now, when we talk about the difference between eubacteria, common bacteria, and archaebacteria, I found this picture on internet that could be very helpful. For example, difference between eubacteria and archaebacteria. Both have cell walls, but the bacteria has peptoglycan. That's a type of carbohydrate only contained inside eubacteria cell walls. One of the most different features of archaebacteria and eubacteria is that archaebacteria live in extreme environments. Remember, this is the most important thing. Archaebacteria, they are known as extreme bacteria. Well, while the similarities between these two organelles is that they don't have a nucleus, which means they are prokaryotes. They are single-celled, which means they are unicellular, and probably they are related by a common ancestor. Do you remember the topic of systematics and cladistics? Well, these two organisms are linked by a common ancestor. But how was it that a scientist managed to distinguish the difference between eubacteria and archaebacteria? This was very interesting. It is supposed that a lake that was found on Yellowstone Park at the United States, was very interesting for scientists in order to see the different properties of the hot water. Now remember, these lakes, these geyser lakes, are very, very hot, extremely rare because they have a lot of different elements, so scientists decide to study them. Once they study the water in the microscope, they observe some structures similar to bacteria. When they try to compare the biochemistry or the metabolism, they observed that they were completely different to bacteria. So they decided to place them in a new in a new domain or in a new taxonomical category. When they start researching in other parts of the world, they can find that these archeans, these extreme bacteria, can be found in only extreme places where any other living organisms can be found. For example, they can be found on hot lava or in volcanoes. They can be found in the deepest part of the ocean. That's why they call them extreme bacteria. And eubacteria, or a real bacteria, like the one that produces diseases or the ones that we can have in our body or in the soil, could never live in these places. Hot water, very, very deep parts of the ocean, and very hot places like volcanoes. That's a property that only archeans can perform. So I hope that this video could be useful for you previous to the exam. Remember, I'm going to continue uploading different videos to try to define the different biological kingdoms that we are going to see on the exam. So have a nice day, and thank you very much. Goodbye.